Joel, for informing everyone about Wonga for local government. I should also say that Joel is a member of Debt Resistance UK. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. Next we have Jonathan Stevenson, also a member of Debt Resistance UK, but during the day he also moonlights for Jubilee Debt Campaign, and Jonathan will be talking to us about national debt.
Yeah, thanks very much. Which one's the superhero and which one's the normal person? Anyway, so I'm part of Jubilee Debt Campaign. We're part of a global movement that works on international debt in countries around the world. And I guess our slogan, Drop the Debt, is more famous than our actual name. So I commend Helen on the choice of slogan for the NHS campaign. We don't work mainly on UK debt, but we have something to bring, because the UK is not the first country to have a national debt crisis. And indeed, the thing that's peculiar about it is that arguably it's not got a national debt crisis in the same way as countries across Europe and as countries around the global south have experienced over the last 30 or 40 years. But we're doing all the same things in terms of implementing austerity measures and such like. So I thought I'd look a little bit at what the story of debt is that we're told in the UK and what we can do about it. Now, this is pretty much the story of debt in the UK. I doubled the national debt, let me do it again. It's a Conservative Party poster from before the last election. And pretty much what's happened is that everyone decided that that was true, and particularly the media, and blamed the Labour Party, and Gordon Brown in particular, for doubling the national debt. Now, did the national debt double? Well, in 2007 it was 38% of GDP. By 2012 it was 83% of GDP. So it did indeed double as a percentage of GDP. But was Gordon Brown responsible, or did something else happen between the years of 2007 and 2012? Now, I think everyone would pretty much agree that the story that the coalition government tells about national debt, people in the progressive side of politics would agree that it's pretty much a fantasy. Ed Balls tried to resist it for a couple of years, decided that everyone had not believed him, and then changed it and said, well, we've got to go along with this. And I think there's a danger that what happens on our side of things is that we say, well, we've lost that battle, so we've got to recalibrate and just go along with it. And there's an idea that the Conservatives have successfully framed debt as dangerous, and we should therefore try to talk about debt as little as possible, because otherwise their framing will lodge in people's minds and we'll basically lose. But I think one thing I want to stress is it's not going to stop, even if we do that. So this week we've heard that the government's sending, or HMRC is sending a little graph to every taxpayer in the country, telling them what their taxes have been spent on. And aside from the very outrageous fact that welfare is the biggest and one big blodge on the graph, and it's an attempt to make it look like unemployed people get the biggest share of our taxes, when actually it's a tiny proportion of that. There's also this big chunk that is national debt interest. So it's part of the drip feed of national debt is a bad thing, and everything that you should do should be orientated around trying to pay off the debt as quickly as possible. There's a much bigger discussion to be had about what is productive investment, what is national debt for, what is good debt and what is bad debt. The Institute of Economic Affairs got a lot of headlines this week with a report that said we haven't even started tackling the national debt problem in the UK, and we've got an ageing population. We need to reduce spending by 25% in order to deal with the debt problem over the next 30 or 40 years. That's pretty much the same amount as we spend on the NHS. I wonder why they would have picked that particular set of spending to go for. So in terms of debt resistance, how do we resist this story? Well, how do you resist a problem like George Osborne. The problem we have on national debt is that the Chancellor is the person that decides whether or not to pay. So in order for us to resist the prioritisation of reducing the deficit, reducing the UK's national debt above all other things, we have to do something about who is the Chancellor. Now, I'm not going to get into, especially not working for a charity, the question of how you replace the Chancellor with anything else. But one tool I think we can learn from in other countries that have experienced these kinds of problems is the debt audit, as other speakers have said. Ecuador is the most famous example of a debt audit where you've got a strong left-wing government in power. They audited all of the debts. They looked at the original contracts. They found some of them were illegally drawn up, and they decided not to pay. They decided to declare they weren't going to pay, and then through the combination of radical politics and clever financial market dealings, managed to reduce their debt by a long way by buying it back on the secondary debt market in secret. You could say that having such a government isn't anywhere near happening in this country, but you might have said that in some other European countries a few years ago. Not that I'm saying that political parties are the way to affect social change, but around the world and around Europe, in Portugal, in Greece, we've got a prominent figure in the Greek debt audit campaign in the room. In Ireland, in Belgium and France, there are debt audit groups, there are debt audit movements, and we need to learn from them. Very quickly, in my last 30 seconds, what have we got to say about the UK's debt? Well, something like 25% of it is quantitative easing. It's owed to ourselves. Another 29% of it is external debt. External debt is the debt that matters. It's the debt that you don't have sovereignty over, and it's a very small proportion of the UK's debt, and most people don't realise that. You've got the difference between the UK's public debt, the external 29%. The external private debt is 395% of GDP. So I think one of the things that we could do through a debt audit is tell the story of what the UK's true national debt is, but also what the UK's true private debt situation is, and the balance between those two things. And then obviously, as Helen said, there's the NHS debt, there's the off-balance sheet liabilities that aren't even included in the figures. So to conclude, national debt is kind of where it all comes together. All the different struggles end up in this starting point for all politics in the UK at the moment, which is we must reduce the deficit, and that comes before everything. And we're not going to resist that in one fell swoop, but it's got to be part of our consideration. And a debt audit is a way to educate ourselves. It's a way to build a movement through a process of learning and educating each other, rather than going straight to the politician and demanding change immediately. Thank you.